In this video, we're making pavement bases for miniature games. So what we're going to be doing is just taking a regular base and cutting into it to create cracks and add visual interest. The texture that already exists on the base is going to work fine for making the texture of the pavement. So I'm just taking my knife, I'm cutting in scores, and then I go back and I cut V's along these lines in order to create some depth so that when I dry brush over it, it'll accentuate these cracks that I've now put into it. The idea is that I want to cut in sort of lightning bolt sort of shapes. So I cut in jagged lines and then I branch off more jagged lines from the originals. Although it's uncommon, some bases do have imperfections, but we can make use of these with our base design. So while there's this dip here from the casting process on this base, we're going to turn this into a pothole and fill it with some sand in order to make it work for our basing. To start, I'm cutting little V's in around this little dip here that I've got and trying to make somewhat of a star shape in order to create my pothole. I'll then take these little V's that I've cut out and then start branching off the lightning bolts that we did on the first half onto this base in order to make it a more cracked overall surface. You can see our pothole base now starting to take shape with all of the cracks and damage. I'm going to take some white glue and fill the pothole that I've made with it so that I can sprinkle sand in. This is going to add in the look of some broken pavement that's been in this pothole. So I'm going to dump in the sand and I'm going to pat it down in order to make sure that it's in there nicely and then tap off the excess. I've primed the two bases now just using a matte black primer, and I'm going to dry brush onto them in light gray in order to help pick out the details and the texture that already exists on the base. To do that, I'm going to take a black gray paint, so basically just a really dark gray, put a little bit down onto a palette here. I don't use a wet palette when I'm dry brushing because it adds too much extra water to the paint. I'm going to use a makeup brush because they work really well for dry brushing, just a cheap one that I bought on Amazon. So I'm going to just get most of the excess paint off by rubbing it onto this dry brush plate here. And then I'm going to take my brush and quickly brush it over the base and try and pull off the surface texture. When I do this, I go in all directions because I'm just trying to get a nice even coverage. It's going to be pretty subtle, but I'm trying to go for a fairly new looking pavement here, even if it is kind of cracked and weathered. Next, I'm going to take a lighter gray in order to bring up the shade a little bit more and try and bring out a little bit more details because it's still a little bit on the dark side, and I just want to have this pop just a little bit more. Okay, we've got some bases now that look like pavement, but they're a little bit on the plain side. To add to this, we're going to add road markings. For this, I'm going to take masking tape and put a couple of strips in order to give me a nice straight line to paint into. Now, if I were to take these lines and just paint into them as is, I'd end up with a nice clean yellow line. But because the base is damaged, I'm going to add some weathering onto it. To do this, I'm going to take a sponge with liquid mask and dab it on. It's important not to have too much liquid mask on the sponge, otherwise I'm going to flood the surface. But if I get most of it off, similar to dry brushing, and then dab it on in different spots, when I pull this off, it's going to end up leaving a more weathered appearance to the line. Now that the liquid mask is dry, I can start adding paint. Because I'm going to do yellow on these, I have to start with a dark yellow color in order to get some real substance for the brighter yellow to show up on. You could use any color though, you could do white lines or red lines or blue lines, whatever you really want. I'm going with yellow because it reminds me of a normal road. So I'm going to first put down a nice even layer. Not worried about being too neat since this is going to be a first coat. Plus, I'm looking for a weathered look overall anyways. With the dark yellow dried, I can now add on the brighter yellow. It's important to have something as a base for using a bright yellow because it's not going to show up on black very well on its own. Now that the paint is all dry, it's time to remove the masking tape as well as the liquid mask that we applied. Now, when I do remove the masking tape, most of the liquid mask is probably going to come with it because it overlapped. And this is going to start to give us that nice weathered look immediately. In order to get rid of any remaining liquid mask that may be on the surface, I just take a normal white eraser and just brush it off the surface. It's important, of course, that the paint is dry, otherwise we'll be smudging it. But using the white eraser just removes all of that liquid mask nicely without damaging the dried paint. And there you have it, our two bases. Now, I want to add a little bit more to them. You could add some chemical spills with some sort of a lime green paint. You could add blood with a blood effects paint if you wanted. I'm just going to add a little bit of writing here. So I'm going to take an AK pencil, a white one, sort of to look like chalk, and I'm just going to do some writing on the base to add some more visual interest and make it look a bit more lived in. Of course, you could write anything you want. I just decided to go with something generic and sci-fi like scum. And with that, our bases are done. To do it on a larger base is the exact same thing, but you might want to add a bit more details to try and help fill up that empty space that you'll end up with a larger base. Thanks for watching. If you have any ideas for further videos or any comments on this video, please let me know in the comments below.